Welcome back to Part B of Chapter 3. Again, this is Gary Mrozinski. We're just about to talk about markets because this is the chapter on supply and demand. So first we're going to talk about what a market is, and then in this video we're going to talk about the demand side of the market. A market exists whenever an exchange takes place. An exchange, which is a buyer purchasing a product, could be a good or a service, and a seller, a business, selling the good or service. So there's an exchange of dollars in return for products. And we're going to use examples in this chapter mostly of product markets. We just got done talking about the circular flow model, which taught us that there are both product markets and resource markets. Well, to simplify things, we're going to talk mostly about product markets as examples in this chapter. So, in any given product market, the market for new automobiles, for example, or the market for gasoline, or the market for computers, there is a supply of the product. This is businesses supplying some certain quantity of the product to the market, and there is a demand for the product on the part of buyers. Collectively, they make up the demand for the product. And I'm going to remind you that there is this assumption we always use whenever we are constructing an economic model. And whenever we state a law, a principle, any kind of economic concept that's based on an economic model, it usually is, then we have to apply the ceteris paribus assumption, and we're going to do it here. And that means, other things equal, if nothing else is changing, this will cause this to happen. And we're going to do that right now. So here is an economic model. The law of demand. The law of demand says, as the price of the product goes up, the quantity demanded by buyers goes down. Also, as the price of the product goes down, the quantity demanded by buyers goes up. So they go in opposite directions, right? The price and the quantity demanded by buyers go in opposite directions. Now, to graph this, if we were to graph price on the vertical axis and quantity on the horizontal axis, which we're going to do for the rest of this course, then graphing the law of demand would result in a downward sloping curve. So let's talk about why the law of demand is what it is. What explains the law of demand? Well, there's actually three reasons that we're going to talk about. The common sense explanation, which you probably are already thinking about. What's called the law of diminishing marginal utility. That sounds more difficult than it is. And then two related effects, the income effect and the substitution effect. That's really like 3A and 3B. So let's go through each one of these. The common sense explanation for why when the price goes up, people buy less of it is people ordinarily do buy more of a product when the price goes down and less of it when the price goes up. So why is that? Well, price is an obstacle that keeps you from buying something. And think of it, now this is part of the explanation because this applies to part of what we all buy, some of the goods and services we buy. Think of it as being, let's say, maybe this is the market for iPhones. Now you may have, every one of us probably has, a maximum price that you're willing to pay for a smartphone. For me, let's say it's $600. Well, that means I will pay up to $600 for an iPhone if I'm in the market for an iPhone. So if the price of a new iPhone is $700, I'm not going to buy it. But if the price were to drop to $600, now I'm going to buy it. And other people that have that same maximum price are also going to buy it. So as the price comes down, there's a larger pool of buyers who are willing to pay that now lower price. Maybe that lower price now is within the range of price that they're willing to pay. As the price goes up, there's a smaller pool of buyers that are willing to pay that now higher price. The maximum price they're willing to pay now is maybe less than the actual price. So this is the common sense explanation for this. Now, the law of diminishing marginal utility, again, this sounds more complicated than it is. First, let me introduce you to the term marginal. This becomes a real big deal in the microeconomics course. And actually, we spend more time on this law of diminishing marginal utility there. Utility simply means the usefulness or benefit that we get from purchasing and consuming a product. Now, the term consumption in economics means you purchase and use a product. When you do that, you have consumed it. Whether or not you physically consume it. Food products you actually physically consume also, but if you just purchase something and use it, you are consuming it. That is consumption, right? Now, utility is the usefulness you get out of consuming any product that you buy. You compare that utility to the dollars you spent for it, and that's the economic decision you're making, right? Is there enough utility? Maybe it's something that costs, well, the iPhone. If the iPhone costs $600, to you, that represents about $600 of utility if you're buying it. But if the price were to go up to $700, you might not think there's enough utility to justify the $700 price. This is the economic decision that buyers make, right? We focus on this kind of concept more in the microeconomics course. We have several chapters on consumer behavior. All right, so utility then is the benefit you get from purchasing and using a product, consuming it. Marginal utility is the extra benefit you get from consuming one more unit of the thing. The marginal utility, if you purchase more than one unit of something, it will get smaller the more of something you purchase. Let me give you, my favorite example is the pizza example. So it's lunchtime, and you walk into a pizza restaurant for lunch, and let's say pizza is $2 a slice. And so you walk up to the counter, you give your $2, you take your slice back to your table, and you eat it. And that slice would have a very large amount of marginal utility for you because you were very starving. So marginal utility is the utility you got from consuming that unit. Marginal, the term marginal is the same as saying extra. So the extra utility you got was a lot because you had zero utility before you went in, and now you ate one piece, you were very hungry. That represents a lot of utility to you. Now you might still be hungry, and you walk back up to the counter, and you hand over your $2 and you buy a second slice of pizza. By the way, is it slices or cuts? Depends on where you're from. I grew up in the Wilkes-Barre area. We called them slices because we ate pie pizza. I live right now right next to Old Forge where they have square pizza. They call them cuts, but don't let me get off track. Okay, so you buy that second slice of pizza. You sit down. Remember, you're still hungry. That gives you a lot of benefit, a lot of utility. So the marginal utility of that second slice of pizza is the utility you gained by consuming that second slice. The marginal utility of that second slice might be a lot, but it's less than the marginal utility of the first slice. So when you went from 0 slices to 1 slice, you gained a larger amount of marginal utility than when you went from 1 slice to 2 slices. The marginal utility diminished some. Now you might still be hungry, and you might walk up to the counter and buy that third slice for another $2. You're going to gain, you would only do that if you thought you were going to have some utility. You weren't full yet, so you're going to gain some utility. You go back to your table, you eat that third slice of pizza, you're going to gain some extra utility from it, some marginal utility. It's not going to be as much as the marginal utility of the second slice, and that's not going to be as much as the marginal utility of the first slice. Do you understand what I'm saying here? So the marginal utility will diminish or get smaller the more of something you consume. Now you might still be hungry and think about going up to get that fourth slice of pizza. Well, you might stop yourself because even though you're still hungry, you might think, I'm not hungry enough to get enough utility benefit from that fourth slice to justify the $2 I'm going to pay. Right? However, what if the price were to come down to $1 a slice? now you might buy that fourth slice of pizza because it does have enough marginal utility to justify $1 of your resources. So this is why this partially explains the law of demand. If the price were to come down, people would buy more units of the thing. If the price were to go up to $3, you might stop at the second slice, right? So this is, again, an explanation of the law of demand. And there's a third explanation, which again has two parts to it. The income effect and the substitution effect, which are going to come up again later in this course. So I'll just sort of briefly mention them here. The income effect. Well, we're going to learn in the chapter on inflation, when prices go up, it's like your real income goes down. Your purchasing power goes down when you have inflation. Again, assuming that your income is not going up. If price levels are going up, and that's what inflation is measuring, an increase in the overall level of prices. When that happens, and from year to year we've seen inflation be 2 to 3% recently in our economy. Well, if your income is not going up by 2 or 3%, but prices are, then next year you're going to have less purchasing power than this year, right? That's the way inflation works. That is the income effect that inflation has on you. Well, let's think about when prices change just for one product. Let's say this is gasoline. Okay, so you are in the market for gasoline because it's something you buy regularly, maybe once a week. All right. So when the price of gasoline goes up, there's an income effect on you. The income effect it has on you is similar to when inflation happens, which means all prices are going up for all goods and services, except it's less of an effect. If the price of only gasoline goes up by, 25%, it's like your real income went down. You have less purchasing power because you need to buy gasoline, right? Well, you're likely to buy less gasoline because you have less real income to do that with, less purchasing power to do that with. You're going to buy smaller quantities, so fewer gallons per week. You're going to find some way to not drive as much. Maybe you just drive to work and back and forth to work, and maybe as just minimal travel outside of that or something like that. So on the other hand, if the price of gasoline were to come down, again, this is something you regularly buy, now it's like your income has increased. That's the income effect will have on you. It's like you have more real income, more purchasing power, because gasoline went down in price by 25%. You're likely to buy more gasoline. Now the substitution effect, you're looking at substitute markets when there's a change in the price of the product that you're buying, or maybe the change in the price of the substitute product. So you're comparing relative prices, right? So let's see, well, let's use gasoline. So if the price of gasoline were to go up enough, that you're going to seek out substitute products and leave the market for gasoline and go to those other markets. So what might be a substitute for gasoline? Well, you need gasoline for your car. If the price were to go up enough, you might consider selling your car and buying an all-electric car. So now you're buying electricity, right? You're using electricity to fuel your car. So you have left the gasoline market and gone to the market for electricity. Of course, you have to change your equipment to do that. So you would need to you would need to know that the prices have gone high enough and that they're going to remain high for you to do that, right? On the other hand, maybe if you have this electric car and you're purchasing electricity now as fuel for your car, if the price of gasoline were to come down low enough, you might leave the market for electricity, sell that car, and buy a traditional car that uses gas, and start purchasing your fuel in the gasoline market. That's the substitution effect. You're constantly looking for substitute products if there's enough of a difference in price. So anyway, back to the law of demand. So there's our curve. Now, there's two ways to represent the law of demand. One is that simple table, that two-column table you see on the left of your slide. That is what's called a demand schedule. A demand schedule shows the quantities that would be demanded at different possible prices, different possible market prices that there could be in this market. So this is actually an individual's, one buyer's demand schedule. And the product here is corn. So imagine that this is a, let's see, a farmer's market in downtown Nanticoke, because we are in Nanticoke, Pennsylvania, right? So there's a farmer's market, and there is a buyer that maybe buys corn every week and uses that to make something, all right? If the price is $3 a bushel, this particular buyer will buy 35 bushels a week. If the price were to go up to $4, this particular buyer would only buy 20 bushels per week. Well, it looks like the law of demand is in action here, right? And if the price were to go further up to $5, this buyer is only going to buy 10 bushels. But if the price goes from $3 per bushel down to $2 per bushel, this buyer is going to buy larger quantities, 55 bushels per week. So this is definitely a demand schedule where the law of demand is being observed, right? If you graph this then, and again we have price on the y-axis, dollars, and we have quantity, units of the product, in this case bushels of the product per week, on the x-axis. And let me take a moment to tell you that for most of the graphs that you see in this course, there's going to be dollars on the y-axis, the vertical axis, and there's going to be quantity on the horizontal axis. Whenever you see Q, quantity, on the horizontal axis, just know that it's really quantity per unit time. So this is, in this case we're looking at demand, but it applies when we're going to add supply to this graph at some point. It's going to apply to the supply curve as well. It's really quantity per unit time. So it's quantity demanded per day, or maybe it's per week, or maybe it's per month, or maybe it's per year. It's got to be some unit of time that quantity is applying to, and it will be labeled on the graph usually. So you can see in this case it's bushels per week. All right? So this is the quantities that would be demanded per week by this one buyer, and you can see simply how it's been graphed. So try to find the point, the leftmost point on this curve. On the y-axis that corresponds to $5. On the x-axis that corresponds to 10 bushels, right? And then find the next point, which should be $4 and 20 bushels, and so on. So you can see how that curve is simply a graphical representation of the demand schedule. Now this was just one buyer, right? Let's say this market has 3 buyers. So there are 3 people that show up at the farmer's market every week and buy corn. So we just saw Joe's demand schedule, that's the leftmost column, but there's also Jen and Jay. Let's look at Jen. If the price is $3, Jen will buy more than Joe actually, 39 bushels per week. If the price drops down to 2, Jen is going to buy 60. And you can see if the price goes up to $4, Jen's going to buy 23. Jay has a similar kind of demand schedule. So the numbers are different, but the law of demand is definitely happening for all 3 buyers, and it will. The only lesson here is we don't normally talk about the demand schedule and demand curve for an individual buyer. We're looking at market demand. Market demand is simply the aggregate or the sum of the individual demands, the individual quantities demanded at any given price for all of the buyers. You just sum them. So the market demand at $3 would be 35 bushels plus 39 bushels plus 26 bushels, or 100 bushels per week. This is a simple example that's just meaning to convey the fact that any market, whatever the price is, the quantity demanded, the market quantity demanded, just simply would be the sum of the individual quantities demanded by all the buyers. Now, most markets have hundreds or thousands of buyers. It works the same way. A note here on terminology. I'm going to always say either that there was a change in overall demand or a change in the quantity demanded. If you're moving along the curve like we just did, If the only thing that's happening is the price is changing, you're moving along the curve. The curve is telling you the new quantity demanded, right? I'm going to always say quantity demanded. So if the price goes from $3 down to $2, then the quantity demanded goes up. Don't just say that demand goes up. Say the quantity demanded goes up. If the only thing that changes is the price, then the quantity demanded changes. We're going to learn shortly that there are other things that could change other than just the price that could make the whole curve shift. Then we say that is a change in overall demand, either an increase in overall demand or a decrease in overall demand. And these same terms apply to the supply curve, so I'll remind you of that when we get to the supply curve. So there's the demand curve. If we move along the curve, so again, maybe the price was $4 and the quantity demanded was 4 bushels per week for this person. If the price dropped down to $3, and it looks like the quantity demanded is $7. So that's a change in the quantity demanded. Don't just say that demand went down. Don't say demand decreased. Say the quantity demanded decreased. Now, if the whole curve shifts, that is a change in overall demand. Your textbook, just to clarify this, will often talk about an increase in demand or a decrease in demand. When your textbook says that, they mean a change in overall demand. They mean the whole curve is shifting. So that it's even more clear, I'm always going to say, when the curve is shifting, that's an increase or a decrease in overall demand, so that students have that clear in their minds. But your textbook doesn't do that. Your textbook says demand increases due to something. That means the whole curve shifted to the right, okay? So what could make the demand curve shift? We call these the demand curve shifters. There are several of them. Several factors that could make the whole curve shift to the right, cause an increase in overall demand, or shift to the left, cause a decrease in overall demand. So let's go through them. There are 5 of them we're going to address. Tastes. People's tastes for products may increase or decrease over time. And you can think of lots of examples of this. So this is the most obvious demand curve shifter. People just might like to buy the thing and they didn't like it as much 5 years ago, or maybe it didn't exist, right? Or maybe it's just people's preferences are changing. You can think about the apparel industry. This happens, right? As fashions come in, certain fashions come in and out of favor. People's tastes for the fashions change. So the demand curves for any given product, as it goes out of fashion, that's a decrease in overall demand. The demand curve shifts to the left. As it comes into fashion, think of men's ties. Sometimes they get fatter, sometimes they get thinner. They're sort of like a medium width right now. Well, the demand curve for skinny ties, years ago, in my heyday, when I was coming of age, the 1980s, ties were very skinny. Well, by the 90s, the demand curve for skinny ties had shifted to the left, decrease in overall demand. The Atkins diet was popular in the 90s. Actually, came out in the 60s, I believe. There was a Dr. Atkins that came up with this controversial, at that time, diet, which said that it's not high-fat foods that you should remove from your diet. It's carbohydrates. You could eat all the protein-based foods that you want. Cut the carbohydrates out of your diet and you'll lose weight. And people, the medical industry was not behind this. This was very controversial. But by the 90s, there were healthier versions of this. The South Beach diet was one of them, which took a healthier approach to don't just eat bacon as your protein food every day. Eat low-fat proteins and have carbohydrate substitutes. And a lot of restaurant menus then had low-carb menu options. Some still do. And so anyway, this was happening in the 90s, very popular. Even my parents were on the South Beach diet, and they were probably in their 70s at the time. So as this was happening, the product markets for protein-based foods saw increases in overall demand. Eggs, for example. There was an increase in overall demand for eggs in the 1990s because of this. And carbohydrate-based foods saw a decrease in overall demand. And that, again, was just people's tastes. So there's lots of examples that you can find. How about the automobile industry? In the 1990s, again, people's tastes for SUVs, larger automobiles, and fewer sedans. So the market for SUVs saw an increase in overall demand, and there was a decrease in overall demand for sedans. If there's an increase or decrease in the overall number of buyers in the market, this will make overall demand increase or decrease. So, I haven't mentioned this yet, but you could define the market however you want to define it. It could be as narrowly based or narrowly focused, or it could be very widely focused. So, for example, I could talk about the market for gasoline in downtown Nanticoke. So that is a pretty narrow market, right? Narrowly defined. In fact, there's probably only 2 or 3 suppliers of gasoline in downtown Nanticoke. Or I could talk about the market for gasoline in the greater Wilkes-Barre area, which might include Nanticoke, or maybe Luzerne County, or the market for gasoline in northeastern Pennsylvania, or the market for gasoline in Pennsylvania, or in the US, or globally, and so on. So you can define it however you want to define it. It just depends on what you're trying to learn about or understand. Well, however you're defining that market, if there's more buyers, maybe because of population growth or immigration, then there should be an increase in overall demand for most products. So let's talk about downtown Nanticoke. In 2010, Luzerne County Community College opened a new building in downtown Nanticoke, the Culinary Institute. And for those of you that don't know, Luzerne County Community College is not in the downtown area. It's sort of on the edge of town. It's in Nanticoke, but it's on the edge of town. Well, we decided to purchase property in downtown Nanticoke and put our Culinary Institute there, and we built a new building. And 1 year later, so these projects were happening at the same time, we opened a health sciences center. We moved our health sciences programs from main campus right into downtown Nanticoke. So once we did that, we had, 400, 500 students in the downtown area every day. Faculty too. So there was an increase in the overall number of buyers for whatever is sold in downtown Nanticoke. All the product markets where products are sold in downtown Nanticoke. So the market for gasoline, there were a lot more buyers now. There's an increase in the number of buyers. And maybe not all of those 500 students are buying gasoline in downtown Nanticoke, but some are. So there's an increase in overall demand. The overall demand for grocery products, there's a grocery store there, should have increased, and it did increase. And again, not every one of the 500 students or faculty are buying their groceries at Weiss Markets, but some were. The overall demand for restaurant meals should have seen a big increase, and so on. That's because the number of buyers increased. If we were to leave, and actually let me give you a better example, the building we purchased for our health sciences programs was actually an empty office building. A few years earlier, there was an employer in there which had 300 employees. That employer ended up moving out of town for some reason. When that happened, there was a decrease in the number of buyers in those product markets. So this shifts the demand curve to the right or to the left when there's a change in the number of buyers. Okay, let's move on to the next demand curve shifter. When people's incomes increase or decrease, this shifts demand curves for products. And you'd have to think about the overall average income in a market. As that rises over time, that causes an increase in overall demand for most products. Most products are normal goods or normal products, normal services. And when that's the case, an increase in income will increase overall demand for those products. So people will buy more steaks. As their incomes rise, they'll buy more automobiles, they'll buy more electronic equipment, and so on. Now, there's a special category of products for which when people's incomes go up, they buy less of these products. Can you think of an example of that? something, maybe you're a student now, so you're not working full-time yet, and you're saying to yourself, when I get my first good job, my first full-time job with benefits, I'm never going to buy that product again. I'm only buying it because my income is low. What's an example of that product? A little bit louder. I didn't hear that. I still didn't hear it. A little bit louder. Oh, I can't hear you because this is recorded in the past. Sorry about that. How about ramen noodles? I'm never going to eat ramen noodle. I'm only eating them now because I don't have much money to spend and I have to eat something. Or you can think of lots of food examples, right? How about this next example I'm going to offer to you under protest because I actually like this product, but Hamburger Helper. Hamburger Helper is a very inexpensive meal, right? All you have to do is add ground chuck, which is an inexpensive ground meat. And for a couple dollars, you could feed your family with Hamburger Helper. Again, I really like Hamburger Helper, so it hurts me to present that to you. These are called inferior goods. As people's incomes go up, they buy less Hamburger Helper. They buy less ramen noodles. Can you think of any other examples? The best example is public transportation. Public transportation is something that as incomes rise, people purchase less of because now they could afford to buy their own cars, right? And this even happens over time. Now, I'm from this area, and I can tell you when I went to college, I actually did not have an automobile until I graduated from college and got my first full-time job. So I was borrowing the family car. We only had 2 cars in the family. My brother had a car. My father had a car. So I didn't have access to that very often. Certainly not to go to school on a daily basis. So I was bumming rides from friends, and on a regular basis, I was using the bus, public transportation. And I can tell you, they were much more crowded, these buses, then than they are now. We have a bus that comes to our campus, and it's actually fairly full. But most of the others are not nearly as full as they were, I'm telling you, in the 1980s. And what's the reason for this? There's less demand for them. Why? People's incomes have risen since the 1980s over that span of years. And there's less demand for public transportation. There were more taxi companies too. And I'm talking about even before Lyft and Uber. I realized this is maybe like 10 years ago. I needed a ride to the airport. I couldn't find a taxi company. There's only one in the Scranton area. And there might be 1 or 2 in Wilkes-Barre. There were like 5 to choose from years ago. There's just not as much demand for them anymore. So public transportation is a good example of an inferior, it's not a good, it's a service really. Spam, that's an inexpensive food product. Canned ham. Used cars, how about used cars? As incomes go down, as might happen during a recession, let's say, people buy more used cars, right? As incomes go down, the overall demand for used cars goes up. And then, as their incomes rise, maybe as we're recovering from the recession, people stop buying used cars and go to new cars. So anyway, this is a small category of products. Most products are not inferior goods, they're normal goods. But this is how income could be a demand curve shifter. Another demand curve shifter is prices of related goods. Now don't confuse this because remember I told you at the outset that if the price of the product changes, you move along the curve. It doesn't shift the curve. Well, this is not the price of the product under question. This is the price of some other product in a different market that's related to the product we're studying. There's 2 ways products can be related. They can be substitutes for each other, or they can be complements of each other. So let's look at each of these. Substitutes. Again, this is where, let's use desktops and laptops. That's a good example, actually. The price of laptops has dropped over the years compared to, say, 10 years ago. Today, you can buy a laptop for $250, a low-end laptop that has basic capability for, Microsoft Office, Word, Excel, PowerPoint, Access. Not many people use Access, but you've got the Microsoft Office suite of applications that can run on a basic $250 laptop. You can access the internet, that kind of thing. You could do this course with a $250 laptop online if you wanted to. Years ago, a basic laptop was $500 to $750, like 10 years ago, let's say. They've really come down in value, or come down in price. It's become much more competitive. As that has happened, the overall demand for desktop computers, PCs, has decreased. It has shifted the demand curve for desktop computers to the left. And you might say, well, for me, a desktop and a laptop, they're not substitutes. I need one or the other. Maybe I need to be mobile, so I absolutely need a laptop. Or maybe you think, I really need to have a desktop because I need a full-size keyboard and I need the larger monitor. And so I could never be happy with a laptop. So for me, it's not a substitute. Well, that may be true, but if it's a substitute for some of the people, there will be an effect. It just might be a smaller effect than if it were a perfect substitute. So don't think that the two products need to be perfect substitutes for there to be an effect. If they're substitutes for any percentage of the buyers, then there will be an effect. It just might be a smaller effect. So again, that's how that works. If the price of the substitute product goes up, people will leave the market for that substitute product and come to this market. So that increases overall demand for this product. If the price of the substitute product goes down, people will flee this market and go to the other product market where the thing is relatively less expensive now. That means there's a decrease in overall demand for this product. That's if they're substitutes. The other way they can be related is if they're complements. Products are complements if you tend to buy the two products together. So there's some examples: college tuition and textbooks, bagels and cream cheese, eggs and bacon, things you tend to buy together. Maybe not every time, but if you tend to buy them together, they're complements. My favorite example that I'd like you to remember of products that are complements are hot dogs and hot dog buns. You will not buy any hot dog buns unless you're also buying hot dogs, right? That makes them very strong complements of each other. And when I present this example in class, there's always one wise guy that says, well, wait a minute, sometimes I buy hot dog buns and I make these little tuna sliders that I put in the oven, and so, okay. There may be some people that buy hot dog buns on their own, but for most people, they're going to buy hot dogs and hot dog buns. All right, so if the price of hot dogs, whenever you're trying to understand the effects that price changes will have, what I recommend you do is imagine that it's a really big change. If the price of hot dogs were to double, that will shift the demand curve for hot dog buns. Which way will it shift? The price of hot dogs doubles. Decrease in overall demand for hot dog buns, right? That will shift it to the left. If the price of hot dogs were to come down by 50%, instead of $5 a package, they're $2.50. That will shift the demand curve for hot dog buns to the right. Increase in overall demand, right? Because people are buying more hot dogs. So that's how the price of related goods will shift the demand curve. Most products are independent and not related, at least not strongly enough to other products, just to note that. But that's a special category of products which are demand curve shifters. Now, consumer expectations can shift demand curves. And this is how that works. People are, at any point in time, often either optimistic about the future, their financial future that is, or pessimistic about the future. That affects their buying behavior, especially for certain types of products. If you are optimistic about the future, you are likely to buy more real estate, or maybe buy a larger house than you would buy you're in the market for a house, you'll buy a larger house when you're optimistic about the future than you would if you're pessimistic about the future. You might still buy a house if you're pessimistic, but you might buy a $150,000 house instead of a $200,000 house. You see what I mean? So in times of prosperity, when our economy is doing really well, the average person might be more likely to buy the $200,000 house. When it's a recession, they might not buy any house, or if they do, they'll buy a much less expensive house. So the overall demand for real estate shifts to the left. Decrease in overall demand for real estate when people's expectations about the future are pessimistic. When people's expectations about the future are optimistic, there's an increase in overall demand for real estate. Now we're going to talk more about this when we get to chapter 8. The cycles of the economy. The demand for some products are closely tied to the cycles of the economy. People buy more of this stuff when it's prosperous times, and they buy a lot less of this stuff when it's a recession, like luxury items, new automobiles, expensive things, right? So that's how your expectations about the future could influence your buying behavior and shift demand curves for certain products, right? All right, let's summarize. Okay, so let's summarize the demand curve shifters. As buyers' tastes for certain products increase or decrease over time, it increases or decreases overall demand for those products. If there's a change in the number of buyers, an increase in the overall number of buyers in a market, that shifts demand curves to the right for products that are sold in that market. As people's incomes rise over time, the demand for most products increases. Overall demand increases, unless it's an inferior good. And then as people's incomes rise, the overall demand decreases. If there's a related product that sees a price change, that could shift the demand curve for a given product. And there's two ways products can be related. They can be substitutes for each other. They can be complements of each other. And then if consumers' expectations are either optimistic or pessimistic, demand curves could increase or decrease overall. And now it is time for a quiz. Okay, now it's time for a quiz. Consider the demand for orange juice. So this is the market for orange juice we're concerned about. What happens to the demand for orange juice in each of these cases? So the first thing we're looking at is, what if the price of apple juice increases? So that's a product in a different market, right? But they're related because they're substitutes. And you might say, well, they're not substitutes for me. I like orange juice. I would never drink apple juice. I would never make that substitution. Well, that may be true, but they are substitutes for a large enough percentage of the buyers that there will be an effect. They don't have to be perfect substitutes for there to be an effect. It's just that it might be a small effect. All right? So the price of apple juice increases. What will that do to the demand for orange juice? Well, if they're substitutes, people are going to leave the market for apple juice because the price has gone up and enter as buyers the market for orange juice. This causes an increase in overall demand for orange juice. And there it is. An increase in overall demand for orange juice shifts that demand curve from D1 to the red curve D2. So at the price P1, now people will buy a larger quantity, right? The quantity demanded has gone up because there's a shift in overall demand. So before they were buying Q1 quantity of orange juice per week. Now they're buying Q2, which is a larger quantity of orange juice per week because that whole curve has shifted to the right. Now the second scenario is, what if the price of orange juice falls? So that's not a related product. That's the product market we're concerned about, right? We're talking about the demand curve for orange juice. What if the price of orange juice falls? Now remember, if only the price changes, it doesn't shift the curve. We're talking about the price of orange juice. If the price of orange juice goes down, you just move along the curve. And the law of demand says, as the price goes down, the quantity demanded goes up, right? There it is. As the price goes from P1 to P2, so we're moving from point A on the curve to point B on the curve, the quantity demanded goes from Q1 to Q2. See what I mean? So if only the price of the product changes, you move along the curve doesn't shift. And then the third question was, what if consumers' incomes fall in this market? So remember how demand curves respond to changes in overall levels of income in the market. If incomes rise, it increases overall demand for products. The demand curve shifts to the right. Here we're talking about incomes going down. And this is a normal good, right? Orange juice would be considered a normal good. Well, as incomes fall, that causes a decrease in overall demand for orange juice and other normal goods. That's it. You guys did good, I think. So now we understand exactly half the market. We understand demand, the demand side of the market. Now we are ready to start talking about the supply side of the market, and we'll do that in the next video. I'll see you there.